Hello from jolly old London. This is Dana with Priceless Advice interview with the Rob Jackson of Rob Jackson Consulting. Let's take a little look around London and see if we can find where Rob is. Oh, there he is. Great. Well, it's starting to rain. Let's go inside. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Priceless Advice with Leaders of Volunteers. I am the Rob Jackson.
And I am the Dana Litwin.
And we're glad to have you talking today.
Yeah.
He's really Rob.
We swapped accents for the day.
We tried to swap accents for the day. Can you do an American accent?
No.
Okay. Nice try.
At the risk of offending millions of viewers and wrecking the special relationship
that we have. Let's do that. So thank you for taking the time.
Hey, no worries.
We've walked around good old rainy, jolly old London.
Yep. 4 seasons in a day.
4 seasons in a day, and we've had all of them. And we're back at the comfortable, warm, dry hotel room. So that's our fancy background, and we'll cut in the other pieces of London that we had. And just last week, you had the Volunteer Managers Conference here.
Yeah, so we have a couple of big events every year. One of them is organised by the Association of Volunteer Managers, and then this other one was about 300 volunteer managers from all over the UK came together in London, a whole bunch of speakers. A great day was had by all, and it kind of kicks the year off because it's always in early January, so it's a great way to kind of get everybody together and kind of kickstart the volunteer management year.
The one day.
Yeah, it's just a one-day thing. It's just a one-day thing. So we have a number of these kind of they're private businesses. And their kind of main conference audience is actually around governmental issues. Okay. So they will, on the latest cheese rolling regulations or something like that.
Really important.
Yeah, important stuff.
Health and safety stuff.
and for probably about 20 years, different versions of these different companies have done conferences on volunteer management. So they're not the most dynamic in that, they're not kind of a keynote and then a bunch of really small interactive workshops. Yeah. But they're always good presenters, and they always draw in a decent crowd. And we had it last week, just around the corner, from the Museum of London. And I did a session on 10 top tips for effectively engaging your volunteers. There are people there from Sport England talking about impact measurement and evaluation. They had a really great volunteer manager who wrote a piece for my blog just over a year ago and has kind of gone through a career arc upwards, thankfully, since then, who did a piece about influencing within her organisation as well. So, yeah, it was a good day.
Was that anyone else I know?
A lady called Charlotte Whitteridge.
I don't know that I've met Charlotte. I know Joe.
Yeah, Charlotte,
be my friend.
Yeah, definitely.
Comment below, be my friend.
Charlotte was at the Myton Hospices.
Okay.
And the hospice movement over here has a kind of national network, a bit like Alive, but specifically for people managing volunteers in the hospice sector. Yeah. And Charlotte was kind of organising the East Midlands group, which is kind of where I live, and she brought me in. We did a workshop, and then we got talking, and I said, "Why don't you write a piece for my blog?" Yeah. And she did, and then that kind of led on to other career opportunities. So she's gone through, kind of quite a positive career arc, and she is going to be. This is going out after the end of this week, so I can say this.
We can say this. So, full disclosure, we're recording this on January 27th in London Town, UK, and something happens on Friday.
Yeah.
Some bells ring, some people wear pins, some people fly various kinds of flags, hence the badge. something a bit of a controversy.
Yeah, some people think we're leaving Europe.
Some people think
that we're not kind of floating out into the middle of the Atlantic.
I think there's a section that actually wants to unmoor and drift away from the channel.
Become a large aircraft carrier for the United States.
Just really our largest floating aircraft carrier basically. Is really all that needs to happen, and just we'll bump up against Iceland.
Yeah. So the end of this week, they're going to announce
super interesting.
an open bookings for the Heritage Volunteering Conference, which takes place in June.
So that's the big controversy.
So that's the big. No, the big controversy is why they're doing that on the 12th of June when I'm in DC for Points of Light.
Okay. Yes.
True.
True.
And Charlotte is going to be one of the keynote speakers at the Heritage Volunteering Group Conference.
Okay.
So
that's fantastic.
Anybody who's seeing this after we've recorded it, but before the 12th of June,
yes,
and wants to go see Charlotte speak, go see her at the Heritage Volunteering Conference
And
in Manchester.
In Manchester. And if you're in the States, come see me and Rob in separate sessions at Points of Light in June. All of these links and to Rob's website, they'll be in the comments in the description below. That's how YouTube works, because everything on the internet is free.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how the internet works. That's it. So you're famous for your top tips for volunteer managers. We're not going to have you reveal all that for free. People come to workshops and all that good stuff. And what was your biggest takeaway from last week's one-day conference?
From last week's conference, biggest takeaway, I think the message is finally getting through, not just amongst volunteer engagement professionals, but amongst people in non-profits in this country, that volunteering is changing.
Yeah.
And the way that people volunteer is changing. And it's been that way for, well, I've been in the sector 25 years. It's been that way. People have been aware that change is coming, or that it's happening for those 25 years. But quite often those volunteer engagement professionals are the lone voice in the organisation.
This is happening! Yep. Everyone's like,
and I think the message is slowly starting to get through elsewhere in other in the wider organisation, and it's still great for me. I mean, when I came into this field in '94, I know, like most of us, I fell into it completely by accident. I don't think. I mean, my youngest son said to me once when he was very small, "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be a volunteer manager," but that was only because I was a volunteer manager.
Most kids don't do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think I'm really encouraged when I go to those conferences now, see so many people making it as a conscious career choice.
Right.
And not just as this is an easy way to get into non-profits and then I'll go off and do something meaningful like fundraising or executive leadership.
Is it easy? Is it
over
here?
I don't
super
think
different from how it works in the States.
I don't think it's easy to get into. I think it's easier than it has been in other ways. We have had credentials, accreditation in volunteer management. We don't have anything like, well, I say we don't have anything like the CCVA. Pfizer's going to kill me for this.
Pfizer will she will appear in this hotel room and murder you on camera because it's a global certification.
Yeah, it is a global
certification. Country by country, there's also things that also happen.
It is a global certification, but it's also very much like the old AVA was an international professional association, as in there were about 3 people in Canada who were part of it.
Also that, yes.
Yeah. So
it's completely biased towards English speakers and heavily biased towards North Americans.
So there's great people like Tracy in Melbourne who have now got CVA. It's never really been a thing over here. I don't think it's ever really been marketed as a thing over here. So that's kind of one of the differences, is where increasingly over the years, to get a foot in the door for a volunteer engagement professional job in the US, you have to have a CVA. Not everywhere.
Yeah.
There isn't really anything like that over here. I mean, the wonderful Sue Jones has been running accreditation against national occupational standards, but it's also the theme of my latest article is a lot of those schemes are good, but are they looking at the right things? Are we accrediting the right competencies? All of those. So I think that is a difference in the sectors between the US and between the UK, but it is still comparatively easy. I mean, volunteer management is still, because of the level of ignorance around it higher up, it is still one of those things that you inherit because it kind of falls under any other duties as required. And you're sat having a cup of coffee one day when everybody else is working and they think you have spare time, and therefore they'll get you to, as Susan Ellis used to say, anointed rather than appointed.
Yeah, anointed. You are now the knights of the volunteer engagement. I'm in development. I'm in HR. I'm in admin.
Yeah. And that's a lot of what Meridian Swift's writing about at the moment, about the way that we talk about it. So, but people are kind of consciously coming to it saying, I actually want to make a career out of this.
That's great.
This is a field I want to be in. And I think for me that's hugely encouraging, because that's how we get over the same issues that we're dealing with now that we were dealing with 10 years ago, that we were dealing with 10 years before that, and new blood coming in, and new energy and enthusiasm and new insights into it, I think is going to move us forward.
I think so too. And I was following some of your tweets from that conference because they were so highly entertaining and really useful and interesting. And there was some not so popular opinions and workshops and ideas being presented as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing for me was it's easy to lay the blame at the presenter, but we had somebody from the Charity Commission. So the Charity Commission for England and Wales. So this is one of the things that people outside the UK don't always appreciate, that volunteering, like many other kind of political priorities, is devolved. So each of the Scottish, Welsh government and Northern Ireland Assembly, now they're back sitting, have devolved responsibility for dealing with volunteering and the non-profit sector. So there is a separate regulator for the charity sector in Scotland and Northern Ireland compared to England and Wales. So the person who is head of safeguarding for the Charity Commission for England and Wales gave a presentation last week and misspoke.
Okay.
But also included some information on a slide that wasn't immediately clear. And it made it look like that the Charity Commission's guidance now is that every volunteer should have a criminal record check done on them before they start volunteering. In the past kind of 5-10 years, you've only been able to get one if you're going to be working with certain categories of people.
Right. Children, families,
at-risk adults.
At-risk adults, elder care, things like that.
And they brought in, I can't remember how long ago, because thankfully I don't have to deal with it day in, day out, but they brought in a basic level check that I, as a private citizen, can pay £25 for. But of course, the organisation has no control over what information I submit. So to forge it is comparatively easy. So the idea that guidance is issued that says everybody who wants to volunteer should have one of these checks, that immediately puts a £25 financial barrier up in front of everybody that wants to volunteer. Whereas all the other categories are free if you're a volunteer.
Yeah, and just the hassle of the paperwork and the process of waiting for the results. It's another barrier, another hoop to jump through. And
I think, it turns out that's not the actual Charity Commission guidance, but it was quite confusing because you see that on a slide and then the guidance says something different. And I think it's just indicative for me of, and I don't mind saying this because they have no jurisdiction over me.
They're not the boss of you.
No. That institution is very good at, first of all, they're massively under-resourced for the job that they need to do. But that institution is very good at looking at certain regulatory things. They don't have a strong track record of understanding volunteering.
Of course, yeah.
And again, if you've got a big sector institution that doesn't really understand and talk in an intelligent and informed way about volunteering, that's when confusion happens.
Do you think at this conference there's the possibility of that conversation being more two-way? Do you think the person who did this presentation that was not well received, according to everyone's tweets, heard that and can take it back? Like how, because of course I'm also working with, I've been facilitating and helped found the National Alliance for Volunteer Engagement, which right now is limited to the States just for scope of work and being able to get stuff done and not compete with AAVE or anything else. But really umbrellaing this cross-sector communication and helping other sectors that have anything to do with volunteer service understand and speak the same language and have us not reinvent the wheel. But is any of that going in a two-way conversation over
I don't know. I think it would if it was done, if that conference had been organised by somebody like AVM, the Association of Volunteer Managers, the loosely UK equivalent of Alive. Or if it had been organised by NCVO or any one of our kind of national peak bodies, then I think that conversation would probably have happened afterwards. Okay. And I think it would also probably have been less likely to have happened in the first place because the briefing would have been better. I think probably the reason why that person was there was because the nature of the private sector organisation that organises it and deals with a lot of those regulatory things would have got somebody from the Charity Commission, but the people organising the conference wouldn't necessarily have understood the volunteering issues and wouldn't necessarily have necessarily briefed them in the way that an AVM or an NCBO might have done. She misspoke in her remarks and her slide wasn't entirely helpful. Right. But you do that in front of a room full of 300 volunteer managers, some of whom are incredibly well informed. Yeah. And you're going to get like, hang on a minute, what did that just say?
Yeah. What are we doing to ourselves now?
And it's the same. We've had conferences over here where, and I'm sure you in the States and Australia and what have you, where a lawyer will be asked in as a guest speaker to talk about the regulatory and the legislative framework around volunteering, and of course they will do what a lawyer is supposed to do, which is protect your organisation from getting sued. But that isn't necessarily good volunteer management practice.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so it's great drumming up business because it scares people, but it's not necessarily the most helpful thing to say responsibly in front of an audience of practitioners at a conference.
Yeah. And no one was harmed in the...
No Charity Commission employees or volunteer managers were harmed.
During that conference. But yeah, I saw a bunch of tweets explode around that, and and understandably so. And I think it's encouraging to me that at least people are in UK are starting to say, yes, this is a real career. We're still a little further away from that, I think, in the States. And finishing up my board tenure and presidential reign with Alive recently, just kind of wrapping that up this month, and moving completely into just being a member and being on some committees and all of that. It's come a long way in the last 5 years, not just Alive,
Massive
but the sector and the awareness in the sector, and that something like the Alliance can get going, and we can have conversations like this, and more blogs are happening, and more podcasts are happening, and this is launching, and there's still so far to go. So what would be for your local area, you have your own laws and regulations here, and all you speak globally, what would be your piece of advice for someone entering into this profession right now?
It would be one word, and it would be a word I would hope we'd be familiar with, but we need to probably practice a bit more, which is to volunteer.
Yeah, do it yourself.
And I think it's really encouraging to see how Alive has developed after a number of years of there not being anything in the US and a national voice developing, and it's been great to see, although it seems to have stalled in Australia and New Zealand, Armov developing, and AVM, which has been around for about 12 years now, really in the last 3 or 4 years coming and finding a particular level and profile. But that only happens because professionals from within our sector are prepared to volunteer to sit on those boards, and it doesn't have to be national level. I mean, Aaron Spink and I wrote about this in e-volunteerism. I've seen Jessica from Tava talk about it, that we need to be volunteering more. We need to be putting ourselves forward, because it's actually by providing that kind of service to our field that we move our field forward. And we can't rely on the same people. And I think that's one of the things with a lot of the professional association governance models in the States that I've seen, I really like. I like this idea of having a president that's limited to kind of 1 or 2 terms, 1 or 2 years, and an immediate past president, and the expectation that the vice president's going to step up and do that, because it provides that kind of rolling throughput so long as people are willing to volunteer. Here, good governance practice generally says a term of 3 years, and generally, I mean, there's no legally binding thing, generally you can serve 2 consecutive terms. But
6 years can be a long time.
And there's no and people who are doing it, we're going to see one of them in a minute. Hi, Ruth.
Hi, Ruth.
Is
and
doing
that's
a
great. And
fantastic
they're doing
job.
great work, and someone's got to step up and do the work. But that sustainable model, and it was very conscious in when Jason Frenzel and Brian Probst and I, Brian Probst being our treasurer until recently, and Jason also a past president, and me his president-elect, vice president, but having that legacy planned for 3 to 5 years, and we do. And the current, committee, we have it planned out. And if life happens to people, so if somebody can't step up and do the role, we've got a couple candidates kind of with, developing that leadership development. And so really practicing what we preach. And there's been so many articles and so many podcasts, and we're saying it again, that we ourselves being good volunteers, doing good pro bono work at our highest level of competencies for things that we care about, like our profession and our own professional development, and bringing other new voices into it, and good volunteer management practices. So even Alive, changing how much it communicates with members, and what we communicate makes a big difference. We call people. We just that little human touch that we do in our agencies every day, who are still working with them, with agencies, just bringing that over, and it's so necessary. And I really want anybody anywhere around the world, find your regional, local association. Please work with them, get involved, get on a committee, get a special project. There's plenty of bite-sized things.
Start one if one doesn't exist.
Start one if one doesn't exist. And Alive has a model of do that. AVM, I'm sure, has models of how to do that wherever you are in the world. Someone can help you with that. Call me. I just sit around in my house all the time. I do nothing.
But I think the other 2 things on the volunteering thing is that professional associations is one thing. But I've been saying this for years. We quite often get frustrated that people the board, our board doesn't necessarily get volunteering.
Yeah.
So if we're working at two separate organisations
Right,
in the
totally.
same community, why don't I go and volunteer with you to be on your board, and you volunteer to be on my board?
Exactly.
And we work together, you know, and the other one, which
infiltrate.
is absolutely
Infiltrate. Infiltrate.
If you can't beat them, join them.
Join them. Infiltrate. And then beat them from the inside.
But the other one, which was the best advice I got, which was from Susan Ellis, and I kind of followed through on, and people say kind of, how did you get where you are today, is write. Volunteer to write for our field.
Give us an article, give us a blog.
It doesn't matter who you are.
Yeah.
You have an insight into volunteering that other people want to learn from. And they may learn from it by hearing you speak at a conference. They may learn from it by having a cup of coffee with you at a conference. But there are plenty of places. My blog, I'm always looking for guest contributors. E-volunteerism, there's plenty of outlets for people to share that. If you've got a LinkedIn profile, you can do it.
Yeah, a LinkedIn,
a
LinkedIn profile, Medium membership through a Gmail account or through a Facebook account, any of those things. And I find when I started in 2019 working for myself full-time and not having a more than full-time job and a bunch of volunteer opportunity things that I was doing, including being on the board with Alive and with National Alliance, takes a lot of time. Is an absolutely worthwhile investment, but I was like, what is sleep? What is this thing? And just for about the year-ish that I've been working for myself and speaking and consulting and starting fun things like this, it's really been fascinating that I do have time to write, and I was able to get a chapter into Aaron Spink's top 20 things, and I have a lot of, thank you so much. What's your favorite chapter in the book? Insult all the rest of our friends. And we'll do 20 different versions.
Whose town am I going to next?
Yeah, and so this is the magic of editing, everybody. Is we will do take after take after take of Rob's, Beth's is my favorite chapter.
I thought Amira's was really good.
I thought Amira's was great. I love Fiza's.
Andy!
Andy! We'll just the lightning jump cut all of these together and just slap it on.
But writing,
but that
also
kind of opportunity.
Yeah. But writing. I mean, those are great because they're 500 words. That sounds like a lot. It's not. But writing doesn't have to be. You need to contribute a book to the field, or you need to start a blog.
Article.
It could just be responding to something that somebody else has written, throwing your thought in,
Facebook
making
note,
a contribution.
Twitter rant thread. Yeah.
When there's a story in your local newspaper or online about something to do with volunteering that you chip an opinion in, even if it's just our organisation needs volunteers, just something like that. That's just those contributions. They don't have to be massive. You don't have to be Hemingway.
Right.
You just have to write.
I mean,
it gets your voice known and your profile raised. And
get your voice known, get your profile raised.
Your thoughts.
And that's what it all is rolling into, is there's so many kinds of media to consume. Yeah. And there's, people will watch little videos, people will listen to podcasts when they're in the car, on the tube, on the subway, whatever. But I still find it's easiest to read.
Yeah.
And part of what I'm doing with this series is really just transcribing these into their own articles as well. And so these will come out and they'll be all access and closed captions if you're watching it video,
Great.
sound off, sound on, whatever you need, voice description. But it's best to just how can people get this information to know that this is real, we're all out here, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
You have other people to learn from, and we're all learning from each other all the time. I'm still learning stuff every day.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Every interaction I have,
every
time I talk, I learn something else.
Yeah.
And if I'm teaching a workshop, it's it's an interactive experience.
Yeah.
And it is that two-way communication.
And we have a professional journal, which is e-volunteerism.
Yeah.
Which I'm really fortunate now that I've been asked to be the editor-in-chief.
Congratulations, editor-in-chief of e-volunteerism.
Thank you very much, because that's a great way of actually creating an environment in which people can not only write, the big feature articles and stuff like that, but also look at and we are going through a bit of work at the moment. We're looking October this year will be the 20th anniversary.
October 2020. Yeah.
October 2020. 20 years. So we're looking to relaunch the journal as a professional journal for the field. In October this year, there'll be a number of things probably rolling out over the course of about 12 months. But we're going to look at how can we make that content even more accessible and even more engaging for people in our field, so that if you break the subscription down, it's less than a cup of coffee a month.
Oh, it's so easy. It's so easy. And a lot of the articles, if you don't have a subscription, you can just
Points
pop
of
on
View
and
is,
read them.
is free
Points of View is free.
every quarter from me and Erin, and it, just,
and it's worth the investment. And again, it's an investment in yourself. I think professional development is a form of, it's such a common phrase in California, the state, self-care. But it's true. If you take care of your professional knowledge and you keep up to date, and your peers and your boss and your managers, the deciders in your organization, your board, they're seeing that you're devoting yourself to this and getting the subscription. In the States, things like that are often, it's a tax write-off or it's a professional expense, but it's worth it. And another thing I want to impress on folks is, in becoming a volunteer on someone else's board, or for your local association or your national association or your global association like IAVE, and doing a project, if that seems overwhelming because we get very busy and kind of under-resourced in this job, just taking 5 minutes to read that article, to watch a little video for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes. We'll be doing 2-minute Tuesday tips on this channel as well.
Great.
So just
Love
like,
it.
sitting on the train, but great, that's a great piece of advice from somebody that I can't travel to that conference to see that.
Tuesday tips, Wednesday wisdom.
Let's
alliterate every single day of the week.
Tuesday tips, Monday moanings.
I think that might be popular.
I think that's taken. Monday moanings, Tuesday tips, Wednesday wisdom, Thursday thoughts.
Yes, Thoughtful Thursday.
Thoughtful Thursday.
Yeah.
I'm sure some of these are already copyrighted, but let's just
Flippin' Fridays.
Flippin' Friday. Freaky Friday. Freaky Friday.
Swap roles with another volunteer manager in your community.
Saturday.
See if anybody notices that you've gone into the organisation and you're different from normal.
Freaky Friday, the Parent Trap, all of that. I'll come be the Rob Jackson. You come to California and be the deal. I'll give you a red wig. I'll give you a foot taller than I am. I'll give you a red wig. Puff out your sweater a little bit. It'll be fine. Just like, the Ginger Ellen, the volunteer sectors. That's fine. Just the Ginger Ellen. That's all.
Oh dear.
Okay. So this is how it happens when we get together. We pretty much just laugh. We had some lunch. We walked around London. It started to rain on us. We came back here, and we'll have another episode of this that has Ruth with AVN, so kind of talking, and I'm hoping to get in touch with even more leaders and volunteers and friends and colleagues for the next few days while I'm here, and gather those interviews and that information up. And I'm just wondering if there's one final hope that you have with all the changes in UK, things that are happening in the States. Like, what do you think is going to happen in the sector with Brexit? To say the B word, I'm sorry, but I have to say the B word.
Yeah, if I have I don't have many hopes for Brexit, because
hope is a strong word.
My personal opinion is I don't think it's going to be a good thing, but when it relates to the sector, I hope that, and it was something that was talked about not long after the 2016 referendum result, was that volunteering could be a great way of communities coming back together and healing. The last
sure hope so.
3.5 years have resulted in a lot of division in this country, and there are very empty words coming out of Westminster about how magically all of that will be healed on Friday, and it won't be, and quite rightly in some ways, but communities coming together and volunteering and individuals getting to understand each other rather than the polarization which has happened in your country and is happening in our country and other places around the world. Volunteering can play a role in that, and I think that is under-recognised and undervalued, and I hope that is something that comes out of this.
I hope so too, and I hope that there's any kind of healing or rebalancing that happens in the States as well, because I think if we could lift ourselves up out of the North American continent and go float away somewhere, a third of the population wants us to do that, and that's just sad. It's sad when a country gets to the point of decision making being done by some of the more extreme voices. I think it's hard to live through these times, and I'm also seeing an absolute resurgence in our last 3 or 4 years of communities coming together, of the private sector saying, okay, we need to not just sit on the sidelines and make a bunch of money off our communities, we need to help rebuild what needs rebuilding and
Yeah.
fix the infrastructure, and where government is, I'm not one for privatization, but where government is failing, we are seeing grassroots community groups come together, and it's also hopeful to me on a global scale that we're getting, the Gretas of the world, and there's a lot of First Nation and Indigenous American water activists and climate activists that are
which is all
well
volunteering
known over there as well, which is all volunteering.
And I think it's also important to recognise that if the last nearly 4 years had gone the other way, if you'd had a different presidential election outcome, if we'd had a different outcome in the referendum, there would have been another community, perhaps of opposite views to us, who would equally have probably felt disenfranchised and angry and frustrated and disconnected and all of those kinds of things. So, and that's the thing, that's the universality about volunteering, is that it can provide that place for those different views and opinions to come together.
Absolutely, and a theme that's been coming out of the interviews that I've done so far, and I think this is pretty universal, is people are people.
Yeah.
And there's wonderful, generous, hopeful, loving people, and there's, mean, wounded, in pain, and causing pain people, because I think it's always coming from that. I think it's pretty hard to define this as pure evil. It does exist, but most of the time it's like someone is in pain and they're wounded, lashing out, and it's coming out in this way that harms a lot of other people in the process. And elections don't heal things overnight. No matter how much money you spend to make bells ring, they don't
well,
heal
they're
things
deliberately
overnight.
divisive by nature, aren't they?
Yeah, and that's the thing. And so how can we bypass some of what's going on there and still get the work done in the community together and see the humanity in each other and see how we are all connected. It's not an us and them. It's all of us. We're all in this one little blue dot. And we're talking about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. We might get to the point where the dolphins are like, thanks for all the bye. So long and thanks for all the fish. It's like when we see the dolphins coming out, like, oh, okay. That's the point. That's the point we're at. But I hope that we can bring everything and everyone kind of back together into some semblance of civility and cooperation and collaboration, and in the sector in general, for the world, moving towards a model of cooperation, collaboration instead of competition is really the only way we're going to survive and thrive. And talking to Alfredo in Lisbon a couple of days ago, that was one of his big things. It's not just about surviving anymore. It's about we can turn this around to thrive, but it takes massive change, and it takes all of us volunteering. Volunteering is really the way to get some of this change done.
And I think that's for me personally, that's one of the, you look at the arc of the last 8 years in this country. 8 years ago this summer, we had the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games, which was a real, globally as an Olympics, was a really positive thing. But for us I would rather tear my fingernails out than watch the Olympics, if I'm perfectly honest. But as a way of bringing not only our country but also the world together in this sense of positivity and optimism after the 2008 financial crash, and then to see where we are 8 years on with the level of division and discord and one of the strong things about that Olympic movement is the volunteering that goes on with it.
Absolutely.
And in the UK, that was, for me, the first time in my life where volunteering's been celebrated and recognised in that way. Suddenly volunteering was cool and sexy. It wasn't little old Ethel in a charity shop, a twin set of pearls.
Bless you, Ethel, in the charity shop for the work you're doing. But it's not just that.
It was away from that stereotypical image, and we've kind of lost that optimism and sense of togetherness that kind of came through, whether you were a volunteer for that or you were one of the wider volunteers or you just saw all of that potential through volunteerism in our country. And I think, without wishing to sound too idealistic, I think we need to find a way back to that. Absolutely,
and we get so much more good done together than the individual trying to reinvent the wheel. And I'll add a couple of controversial questions at the end here, just to leave us. Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Wars. Sorry, Susan. Sorry. I like both, but it's always going to be Star Wars.
I'll give you that. That's fair enough.
That's going to come back to haunt me at points of light. I can see it happening now.
All of the comments that could be underneath.
I can see it happening now. That's me never getting a gig on volunteer management with the new US Space Force.
Which coincidentally, logo just happens to look like the
Yeah.
Star Trek Federation logo.
However, there are normally people from Disney there, so maybe I've just won over the Disney people. Free
You could.
tickets to Star Wars Galaxy World in Florida
There
are
you
very
go.
welcome.
Maybe you'll get a guest spot on The Mandalorian second
Yeah,
season.
yeah. I'll be the first volunteer. Susan Ellis was the first volunteer coordinator in Antarctica.
Yes.
I'll be the first volunteer coordinator on The Mandalorian.
In The Mandalorian. In space! Volunteerism in space! Well, thank you for taking lots and lots
Pleasure
of time
always.
with me today.
Thank you for
and
coming over.
Good to hang out, and we'll have another episode where we talk to Ruth, and we'll see what else comes out of London. But thank you so much, Rob. Always
Pleasure.
a pleasure.
And see you all at Marva and Points of Light.
See you at Mava and
If you're gonna
Points
be
of
there.
Light. If you're going to be there, which you should, if you can, or the UK conference.
Yeah.
With Charlotte.
Yeah.
One of those. Anything
On
else to
12th of
plug?
June.
We'll put the links in the thing.
AVM conference, if you're in London, the
Mhm.
Association of Volunteer Managers conference, I think it's something like the 22nd of October this year. That's going to be a great conference, always is. That's our other big volunteer management conference after the one last week in the Heritage Volunteering Conference. So, yeah.
That should be good. Cool. Ciao for now.
Bye.
Cheers.